let me tell you one truth that I've been saying for 20, 30 years before Google came up or Facebook. At no point, no consumer at any screen engages with that screen to watch advertising. Nobody switches on the telly to actually watch an ad. Nobody goes in YouTube to actually watch an ad. These things are things that happen to them. So what I'm going to try and do in the next 25 minutes is disrupt the disruptors. And I think you know that joke about who wants change and everybody put their hands out, and then who wants to change and nobody puts their hands up, right? This is a little bit the same. Who wants to disrupt? Everybody puts their hands out. Who wants to be disrupted? Is a little bit tougher. And the question that I have is, when I'm building advertising 9, after all the marvelous examples we've seen of advertising, it seems a little bit too pessimistic. But to be honest, there are enough trends and there are enough things happening that will suggest that at least there is merit in asking the question. And I was going to show you a lot of trends about the advertising industry. I was thinking, let's go and see how the advertising industry is growing in spend, how it is actually moving in terms of number of ads, how the multi-screen is in plethora. But I thought, no, this session is not about us. This session is about consumers. So then I decided to go and ask consumers. And we did a very simple survey in a few markets in Asia. Not in India, but we went to Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and Singapore, and we asked some simple questions about advertising. And this is what they are telling us. 86% of them feel there is more advertising today than there was 3 years ago. 7 out of 10 tell us actually that advertising is more intrusive and it's more annoying than it was 3 years ago. Now, a lot of you can say, well, that's a bit misleading, because if you had asked the question 10 years ago, probably you would have had maybe similar percentages, and that is true. But technology goes both ways, and as I was saying, disruptors are getting disrupted too. So consumers are acting on this. This is some data that includes India data, and that actually shows that of the online population we've interviewed, 32% of them have installed ad blockers either on the desktop or on their mobile. That's basically Gen Z, so the 16 to 19-year-olds. And to be very honest, I don't believe for a second, I'm a sociologist, and I don't believe for a second that that has to do with life stage. So there's no logic that will say that if I'm 20 today and in 5 years I'm 25, I'm going to change the way I'm behaving on this. So just think for a second, if that continues to grow, which has grown enormously in the last 3 years, and by the way, Asia is leading the world on ad blocking, imagine a situation where all those consumers reach their 25, 30, their peak of spend, and you can't reach 50% of them. And it must be serious, because I don't know how many of you have heard of the Coalition for Good Advertising. You're going to hear about this today. The Coalition for Good Advertising, it sounds a little bit like a superheroes group. Superheroes like Google and Facebook sitting at the same table. Superheroes like Omnicom and Group M sitting at the same table. And 2 of the 5 biggest advertisers in the world, P&G and Unilever, sitting at the same table. This coalition started at the beginning of this year. And the purpose of this coalition is they realize that with the current advertising practices, they are destroying the opportunity to communicate. There's no way these guys will sit together if they didn't think this was serious. And that doesn't mean that everybody is doing the wrong things. I mean, there's a lot of people, and we've seen in a lot of the presentations today, that are trying to do better around this. And I'm going to go through 4 examples, 4 areas that I firmly believe, thinking about the consumer, are the 4 areas that can help us to change this trend. And the first one, I'm a sociologist, as I said, I love data. The same one has to do with data. And we've many times heard that statement. I hear that a hell of a lot. A hell of a lot. So again, I'm not going to use the statistics. We just went and asked consumers. Again, same 4 markets. This is in Asia. And we asked them a series of things about advertising. remember, these are all online, heavy online users, because these surveys are done on panels. 2 out of 10 remember in the last week seeing an ad that was relevant to them at that point in time. 2 out of 10. And then we said, okay, of those that remember any type of advertising online in the last 1 week, 7 out of 10 told us that actually they remember advertising that was not relevant to them at that point in time. And that's the quantitative story. I have a qualitative story to tell you, just to ensure you are not having a siesta time with me here. And the first one is, I don't know if you recognize that picture, I'll tell you. Although I'm Spanish, and I always think we know how to party in Spain, I went to Hong Kong 7th last year in April. I live in Singapore, I've been living there for many years. And I have to admit, they know how to party in Hong Kong 7. So if you want a big party, 3 days, you don't need to go to San Fermines, which is where the bullfighting is in Spain. You can go to Hong Kong 7th. And one of the things that they do is everybody dresses up. So there's a lot of fancy dress in Hong Kong 7th. And just to prove that I was there, that's me with a Navy captain dress there. And then you're wondering, what the heck, I'm telling you this story. I bought that fancy dress online. And I promised that for 4 months, I was receiving impressions after impressions of Navy captain dress online to buy something I had already bought. Months. I'm not talking about they got it wrong for a few hours. I'm talking about months. And then there is the other example I have. And I agree these are qualitative, but I don't know if you feel identified with this experience or not, but Uber. First time I used Uber was in San Francisco, 2014. Great experience. That app has been on my mobile, and I've lived since then in 3 markets and visited many where I've used Uber, and it's been on my mobile all the time. In Singapore, I still use Uber, although I have to say Grab is better than Uber. And I'm actually in the Uber car, playing with an app. And I'm receiving impressions that tell me, download the Uber app. And it doesn't happen once. It happens many, many times. The disruptors. So the idea is this really surprising? I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding, so I guess many people have had this qualitative experience. And let me tell you, this does not mean, I'm not being cynical. I'm not saying that this won't work. It will work. But somebody said the other day, we need to differentiate between vision and execution. Because if we don't, it's hallucination. And there is a lot of hallucination in marketing these days. But let's go and measure this. Let's actually measure this with third-party measurements. Comscore data of Asia. All the data I'm showing you is Asia, otherwise I'll tell you otherwise. They know that 5 out of 10 impressions are served outside the target audience. I'm not talking about viewability here. I'm not even going there. I'm not talking about balls and fraud. I'm not talking about that. Those are things that will get fixed, and I'm very convinced they will. I'm talking about actually targeting properly. 5 out of 10. You know, again, you don't need to be a statistician. If you throw a coin 100 times, the probability of getting 50 tails is quite high. That's just basically random. And it gets better because a lot of the examples we've seen today, to me, are many examples that are about high engagement categories, where the data that I have from those categories is very rich. If I'm actually on the health, the number of impressions served outside is only 4, so 60% of the time, they're actually getting to the right target. Why? Because that's a high engagement category. When I go to consumer goods, guys, actually 7 out of 10 impressions are served outside the target audience. Because, let's face it, there's not a lot of people doing search for household cleaners. There's not a lot of people actually engaging with that kind of content. And the other thing is on demographics as well. We see that if we want to be very specific, then we serve a lot of impressions outside. So if we are saying we're going to the 15 to 24 years old, impressions outside that target, that's 7 out of 10. If we go for a very wide audience, 25 and above, then we get the hit better. So, okay, so those are some of the challenges, but what can we do? And what some of the brands are doing? And I work, and I am biased, in the world of surveys, which is the dirtiest word that can be said in many audiences these days. But there are certain things that you can only know if you ask. And what we are doing more and more, and this is an example, is how do we incorporate survey data into media buying? How do we understand more about how consumers feel about brands to influence that media buying as well? So this is an example with Holiday Inn. Granted, it's in the US, like a lot of these things happen these days. But so we did a simple survey that helped us to segment people into inclined to go and do a booking on Holiday Inn, heavy users of Holiday Inn, and people that no matter what you will say, the likelihood of going to Holiday Inn will be very low. Then what we did is we built through analytics, lookalike modeling of this audience. We augmented the audience and inserted into DMPs. Then the DMP was able to create 25 million cookies within that and served the media plan directly to them. And the results, to be honest, were staggering. Change in perceptions of the brand increased by 38%. That, on this buy and on this DMP, was nearly twice as effective as in any other. And what is more important to me, and I guess to consumers, they actually drove 505 times site bookings compared to the same period on the previous year. So again, the first thing that we need to be careful is data, and let's face it, a lot of behavioral data, particularly in this part of the world, online, is always not that great. So what can we do to improve it? That's number one. The second one is very much about being consumer-centric. And we're going to talk about formats here. And again, this is some research we ask consumers. This does include data from India, where we actually say, how do people feel towards advertising? The good news is people feel okay towards advertising. It's not that people don't want to see advertising. The top is Southeast Asia, the bottom is India. So 80% of people feel positive towards TV ads, 80% feel positive towards newspapers. It drops quite dramatically when we talk about online, though. And what is more interesting is when we actually talk about the younger generation, the 16 to 19, across the board, either traditional or digital, they are less favorable to advertising. And as you can see in the online arena, not even 50% are favorable to advertising online. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge that we can make better if we are consumer-centric. If you have your brand or your publisher KPI as your primary motivation, it's going to get tough. If you give consumer control, it's going to get better. If we talk about either rewarding the consumer or giving them absolute control on how they view and when they view that content, then, as you can see, we have a lot more positive attitude towards advertising. But equally, we can make it a hell of a lot worse. So when we ask consumers, do you feel positive towards social autoplay? You can see the numbers. In-banner autoplay, 33% feel positive. 44% actually tell us we hate it. So if you're a brand and you are saying, I'm going to put this content down your throat, whether you like it or not, I guarantee you'll be doing yourself a disservice. And that takes me to the third point. So if we give control to the consumer, if we truly take that risk and say you're going to have 100% control, the key to gain attention has to be on the creative. The key to gain attention cannot be that I'm trying to browse something on my mobile and suddenly I receive a whole ad that blocks my whole screen and I can't even find the X button to actually close it because they are getting a sneakier and it's in very light gray. You can actually even close the bloody thing. I guarantee you, I've been in that position and I've made a decision, certain brands I'm not buying. I'm actually not buying them anymore. This is TV data. And what we did is we look at over 100 brands over a period of 3 years. And we look at how this market share had changed for that brand over that period of 3 years. And then we look at different variables. We look at total spend, so pure GRPs. How much, if I take pure GRPs as my variable, explains market share changes. As you can see, it explains very little. Then I took effective GRPs. Effective GRPs is we run creative development tests, so we know what is the creative power of different ads. So we included that creative power into that multiplication. And as you can see, the minute you include the quality of the creative, we explain the hell of a lot more. It is true, though, that share of voice, raw share of voice, explains even more than that. But share of voice with the quality of the creative explains nearly 30% of the changes on market share. This is TV data. But if it is true in TV, why wouldn't it be true on digital? This is a database of over 10,000 campaigns we've run on brand lift. And what you see there is the difference of those exposed to non-exposed to advertising on brand metrics. And what we did is we took those 10,000 and we said, how about we look at the top 20 creatives? By that is, we asked some questions about the creativity to the consumer. So the top 20 favorite ads versus the bottom 20 least favorite ads. And what we see on a digital environment is if you don't have a good creative, you actually have a negative impact on your brand. So what we've seen is you normally don't see a lot of negative brand lift, and I wonder why, because there is negative brand lift. And being funny or humorous is what consumers want to see in advertising. Tell them an interesting story is what consumers want to see in advertising, and has good music. So creativity is absolutely essential, and that has to be our tool to engage the consumer. It cannot be imposing our brand on their browsing experience. But I will go even further than that. The Advertising Research Foundation did last year a marvelous paper, and they looked at 5,000 brands in 40 countries. It was incredible. And one of the things that they noticed was campaigns that actually run in more than one media are a lot more efficient than campaigns that run in one media alone. But that poses another challenge for advertisers when it comes to creativity and for partners and agencies, which is consistency. We partnered with ARF, and we actually looked and segregated all those campaigns into campaigns that had an advertising idea that cut across touch points, is what we call a non-integrated creativity, and campaigns that were integrated, even if it was as simple as taking your TV ad, paste it on YouTube. 48% more efficient. It is true, again, that if on top of it, we make it customized to the screen, then is 67% more efficient. And that's why I firmly, firmly believe that now more than ever, the concept of advertising ideas is more relevant. It's not just about hitting a good creative. It's about how do I tell the story about my brand through communication in a consistent way. And Keith Weiss, the CMO of Unilever, was saying in February, the thing that keeps him away is brand fragmentation. So that plethora of touch points can lead to that easily. This is precisely an example from Unilever in India, which we tested with them, a cross-media campaign. I'm not going to play the videos. We've seen plenty of videos already this day. But you can see just by the look and feel whether you find this campaign on TV or YouTube, it's the same ad for both, out of home, on print, or the in-video banner, it's the same experience. That delivers significant lift on brand lift, including consideration, but most importantly, 53% of all that uplift was driven by synergies. And synergies, we mean people that have been influenced to more than one channel. And I'll finish with the one that, to be honest, probably I'm the most passionate with. The plethora of short-term strategies that have exploded in the world of marketing, and we'll explain those. And I do believe that is creating higher rejection to advertising. And I'll explain what I mean about this. But it's a little bit what I call the idea of buy me, buy me, buy me, buy me, buy me now. And that's happening partly, not all of it. A lot of it is happening because trading conditions for many clients in many parts of the world are tough. So there's a lot of short-term looking at numbers and performance. But partly it's also happening because this idea that digital advertising can be measured, is the most measurable medium in the world, and it can influence the consumer at the moment of truth. So we've all learned to live with certain KPIs, things like engagement levels, website visitation, app installs, click-through rates. If that's your KPI, if that's your measure of success, what kind of ads are you going to be creating? I can't believe they're going to be very long-term thinking brands or very brand-building ads. Facebook showed this data today. I don't know who was on the Facebook presentation. We say exactly the same thing. Click-through rates have nothing to do with success. And I know that a lot of people will say, and agree with that, and then go to their advertiser, and they still are working on click-through rates. So the correlation between click-through rates and message association is 0. How it changed brand opinion is 0. How it changed purchase intent is 0. And Facebook was saying today, you know what the craziest thing is? You know what is the most expensive impression you can buy today in terms of audience? What is called clickers. There are some consumers, for whatever the reason, they either have very big thumbs or they are very engaging with anything they do. They click more than others. Facebook was saying some data today that shows the cost of that impression is 5 times higher than a normal impression. You're paying 5 times for something that has no correlation with anything. So, what do we know? What we know, and you know, there's a lot of young people, but I'm sure there's a lot of people on my age as well. We've known for a long time that brands do drive value. They do drive sales. There's some data that we have that if we look at the power of the brand, that is how meaningful, how salient, and how different a brand is in the mind of consumers, will drive more than twice the volume that brands that have a low power. And not only that, we know brands with high power drive premium. So people will pay 14% more on the same category for a brand they have a good opinion of than for a brand they don't. Common sense, right? And then there is another piece of data, which is not ours, but I still think is fascinating, is from IPA, the Institute of Practitioners of Advertisers, which sounds very German, although it's British. And actually, what they did is they did a really interesting analysis. They ran an effectiveness award. And what they did is they looked at all the people that had actually presented campaigns and how many of those were short-term focused. And in 2011, it was about 10% of all the people that presented campaigns. And this is one of the largest in the world, by the way. Now, it was 30%. And what was even more surprising is of those awarded, so of those that actually got the award, 45%, nearly half of them, had a short-term focus objective on that campaign. So not only there are more, but actually the jury is more attracted, obviously, to short-term than to long-term. And that in itself means nothing unless we look at the return. And that's what these guys did in a very clever analysis. They took all the awarded campaigns now, and they compared the ROI versus the non-awarded campaigns. And it was 6 times higher. So take my hat off to the judges. They chose the right campaigns, because obviously they were 6 times more efficient than the campaigns that were not chosen. How much do you think it was in 2011? It was 12 times more efficient. And this is data of ours. WPP ran Brand C, which is, I will say, the largest repository of brand information in the world. We've been running them for over 19 years. We asked one question about some of those brands, and one of the questions that we've been asking for the last 14 years is, do you think this brand has a purpose? I.e., do you think, aside from selling their products to you, do you identify with the purpose of those brands? And what we've done is we've looked at, over a period of 12 years, we've looked at the real growth in the market of those brands, and we've actually looked at the bottom third, so those that are on the bottom third of that question, and on the top third. And over 12 years, these guys have grown 3 times faster than those that, in the eye of consumers, don't have a purpose. So when we are thinking about KPIs for a campaign, for what we are trying to do, what I hope is that we think that if brand is not at the essence of that, we are missing the boat. And here there are 2 examples that talk about brands with brand purpose that have actually done phenomenally well in our region. There is Wardah, which is a cosmetic brand in Indonesia. I don't know how many of you know it, but they basically totally tapped into the inside of, you can be Muslim, you can be a woman, and you can love being beautiful. So it totally tapped into that. Look at their market share. This is Kantar Wall Panel data, from 4% in 2013 to 15% share in 2016. And then we have Ilohas. It's a water brand in Japan. And again, by following a very eco kind of approach to their packaging, apparently they use so thin plastic that you can nearly feel the water when you hold the bottle. They actually went from 2010, as you can see, 5% share to 25% share nearly 5 years later. And what I find interesting about these 2 examples is that is a local brand, and we know local brands are kicking us to multinational brands everywhere, in India and everywhere. But this is a brand that belongs to Coca-Cola. So it's not necessarily about being local, it's also about having a purpose and communicating it to the consumers. So, this is what I recommend to a lot of my clients. They need to put an advertising life support system in their organization with very, very simple, this is the last chart, very simple things to do. The first one is we need to improve our relevance hit rate. We can't continue on relying on what is today, and let's face it, it's still today, unreliable behavioral data online. We need to be very brave with formats, and we need to avoid the temptation or you're going to watch this, yes or yes. How we need to get that attention is through great creativity. The worst enemy of brand building are actual CEOs, because CEOs have the perception that with digital, you can do things really cheaply today. And they are putting a lot of pressure on CMOs to go on digital, put more money on digital, do more on digital, because their perception is I'll save cost and I'll still do pretty well. Well, let me tell you, if you want good data, that costs money. And if you want good creativity, that costs money. So I will avoid the thinking that this can be done very cheaply. And the last one is, balance short-term goals with long-term goals. What does your brand stand for? What is your story? So my idea is to leave those 4 messages with you today, and with that, I'm done.